Okay. We're ready, Mr. Chairman.
You call the next case, please.
Case number 6, AT&T Mobility seeks variances for installation and relief from setback and fencing requirements for commercial communications antenna, small cell facilities, or in the alternative, limiting variances at or near the following locations. We want to take them one at a time.
I think we should take them one.
Yeah, we did it last time.
And some are in R zones, some are in C zones, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, A, 71 Morel Street.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Penatar, and Mr. King. May it please the board, my name is Christopher Schubert. I'm the attorney here tonight on behalf of the applicant, New Singular Wireless PCS LLC, better known as AT&T Mobility. And I know that this board is, at this point, probably very familiar with these types of applications. You've probably had 30 plus already, either from AT&T or Mobility, who I think was also trying to establish some small cell node locations throughout the city. So this is 6 more proposed small cell node locations proposed in the city. And for the folks who are still here tonight, who I would suspect that they're interested in the application, just so everyone is clear, I know under the ordinance defines these types of new installations as communication antennas or communication, commercial communication towers. And when somebody who would be in the neighborhood would see the word tower, they're probably thinking something about 150 feet in height, with lights and a lot of big antennas placed on it. But for the benefit of some of the folks who have remained here and who are interested in the application, these installations are considered small cell installations that are placed on utility poles within the public right-of-way. So essentially, we're only talking about a utility pole that would be about 40 feet in height with an additional antenna installation, which would just essentially look like a spackle bucket on top of the utility pole. So the antenna itself is a round antenna. It's a single antenna. It's about 2 feet in height and about 1 foot in diameter. And the equipment that would operate this facility would be placed on the pole itself. And with all these applications, there are existing utility poles up and down the adjoining streets, either owned by PP&L or Verizon Communications, Verizon, the telephone company. And as a result, these types of installations will blend in very much with the other type of utility installations that are in the public right-of-way. And interestingly enough, picking up on that point, if these were telephone poles that were being put in by PP&L or Verizon, they would be permitted to be installed without having to go forward with any zoning approval. But in light of the fact that these are antennas for commercial installation, we do recognize that we have to come before the zoning hearing board and request the variance relief. And again, much to Ms. Newcomb's comment, the ordinance is old and it's outdated. And one of the issues that we have raised in our appeals to the zoning hearing board is a recognition that in the alternative, a way that this zoning hearing board can look at the relief that we're asking for is as a validity variance. It's a different type of variance, which is recognized under Pennsylvania case law. Essentially what it's saying is that if there's other supervening regulations that would essentially make the ordinance outdated, outmoded, then that should be given recognition. And in this instance, the board may be aware from prior applications that the Federal Communications Commission just this year has adopted what is known as, or what has become known as, the small cell order, which has been put into effect as of January of this year. And essentially, the small cell order allows telecommunications companies like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, to come in, to utilize the rights of way, and to place new utility type structures in the right of way for purposes of enhancing their telecommunication services to their customers. And that's exactly what these applications are for, as will be described by the radio frequency expert for AT&T. As a result of that new order, I would submit to the board that, again, one of the ways of viewing this application is we should be able to utilize that right-of-way for purposes of providing this enhanced service for the telecommunication companies. In this instance, it would be AT&T. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we call the witnesses and request that the witnesses be sworn. There were some modifications to some of the site locations in response to some feedback that the site acquisition consultant who will be testifying had received from some of the adjoining property owners. As a result of that, first there was an amended revised addendum that had been submitted to the city under my transmittal letter of November 20 of this year that was submitted to Mr. Oleski. And I would just want to make sure that that's part of the application and that each of the board members has the revised addendum. Essentially, what we ended up doing with that was providing an updated adjoining property owner list, which should already be part of the record. In addition, with regard to a couple of the node facilities, and I understand that what we'll do is we'll take these one at a time, but with regard to the installation that we would get to, which is located off of or near 1504 Lafayette Street, that would be identified as AT&T site UNSC1 Node 4, again, the one at Lafayette Street. There was a slight adjustment in the location of that, so we would be submitting revised plans. The location moved by about 12 feet. So in light of the fact that essentially we're still talking about the same address, I just wanted to be clear and make sure that the zoning board members were aware that there was going to be a slight modification in the location for that site. And then with regard to the node location, which is identified at 124 North Main Street, that was AT&T's site identification UNSC1 Node 1. We are proposing a slightly higher pole at that location. Most of these poles, as I had stated, will top off at about 40 feet. This pole, in order to get it up above some of the adjoining apartment use that was on that street, we wanted to get it up above to the roof line so that it would not have any interference whatsoever with regard to the adjoining residential use in those apartments. So that's going to be an amendment to that application as well.
How high is that one going to be?
48 feet top,
48.
top out, so an 8 feet difference. And we're still under the criteria. Once you hit 50 feet, there's some additional criteria that would be required under the ordinance, but we're not going to trigger that. So with that, what I'd like to do is identify the witnesses who would be available to testify tonight. Mr. Paul Dugan, who's the radio frequency expert. He's a professional engineer with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as well. We have Mr. Mike Ozer, who is a site acquisition consultant. I'm sure that the board's familiar, and he's testified here before as well. And Mr. Ali Shahid, who is the professional engineer. He's a professional engineer with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and he would testify regarding some of the structural aspects in the installation and the components that would make up these types of facilities. And again, knowing that the board is very familiar with these applications, what I might suggest that we do to get through some of the basic RF testimony, the radio frequency testimony, that's all going to kind of overlap with each one of these applications. So I would propose having Mr. Dugan testify regarding the radio frequency need for each of these sites. And then when we get into the detail regarding each of the site locations and the plans that would be applicable to each of the sites, then we can delve into a little bit more of the detail. We also have photo simulations that show what these proposed installations would look like when they would be installed. That may be of some benefit to some of the residents as well. I have a couple of extra copies of the application packets. I'm certainly happy to give those, and they can take a look at them as we move forward. That's fine.
One question before you start. This first one for or on Boulevard Avenue. Mr. Costa, is this the one that was here last time that we turned down, or is it in the same proximity?
You're talking to me, sir?
Yeah.
Yes.
It is similar,
No.
but it is about 100 feet away.
Okay.
It's across the street, isn't it?
It is across Morrell Street in reference to Boulevard Avenue. It's 100 feet down Boulevard Avenue and across Morrell and near Olive and adjacent to Olive.
Excuse me, can
Thank
you
you.
use the mic? I'm being summoned. Thanks.
He needs to be sworn in too, right?
And you also need to be sworn in, yes.
Yeah, why don't you just swear all three of them in? All three of you. It doesn't work anyway, so.
Swear.
Go ahead.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes.
Sorry. Name and address of the three of you guys, please.
You're first.
Name and address.
Sure. Good evening. Paul Dugan. My business address is 132 Jaffrey, Jaffrey Road, and that is Malvern, Malvern, Pennsylvania 19355.
Thank you.
Mike Ozer, 39 Fairview Avenue, Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania, 18344.
Ali Shahid, 31 Beach Street Drive, Glen Mills, Pennsylvania, 19342.
Okay.
Now, Mike Ozer here, in reference to Mr. Gatton's information, being that I'm on the record and all that, it is similar location. It is on Boulevard. It is not on Boulevard Avenue. It is about 100 feet down. It is across the street to Morel, across the street from Morel, and across the street from Elephant.
Now, Mr. And just let the record reflect, I did pass out 2 additional application packets to some of the residents, and they'll have the opportunity to review those as well. Mr. Dugan, and I don't know the best way to do this, because you'd be utilizing your board-mounted exhibits. I don't know if you want to come up here and testify from the podium. Now, Mr. Dugan, let me show you what has been marked as applicant's exhibit A20. Is this your CV?
Yes, it is.
And you're a licensed professional engineer with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Yes.
And you also have some particular expertise regarding radio frequency, site design, and optimization
Yes.
for the telecommunications industry, is that correct?
Yes.
About how many sites have you worked on in your career?
We'll accept Mr. Dugan
Thank
as
you.
an expert.
Now, Mr. Dugan, you have been involved in the preparation of this application on behalf of AT&T for analyzing the existing wireless coverage that AT&T has for the city of Scranton. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you have prepared some documents, some propagation plans for the board's consideration.
Yes.
And before we get into those plans, you are authorized to appear here tonight to testify on behalf of AT&T
Yes.
and to provide your expert opinion regarding AT&T's both wireless coverage and their need for the city of Scranton.
Yes.
Now, with regard to AT&T and its authority to proceed with this application, AT&T is licensed by the Federal Communications Commission, is that correct?
Yes, they are.
And they have licenses issued by the FCC?
Yes.
And let me show you what has been marked as applicant's exhibit A2. If you could just confirm that these are abstracts of the radio licenses that have been issued to AT&T for this area.
Yes, these are reference copies of AT&T's licenses for Lackawanna County.
And that certainly would include the city of Scranton?
Yes.
And as part of its licensure, what is AT&T expected to do in terms of providing service to its customers?
Upon license renewal, AT&T and all the carriers must demonstrate that they're investing in their network to build out their network, to utilize their licensed frequency bands to provide services to their subscribers and the markets they're licensed to serve.
All right. And do they have to provide some standard of coverage, some reliable coverage?
Yes.
All right. Now let me show you what has been marked as applicant's exhibit A3. This is a map showing the location of small cells which are being proposed here this evening.
Yes, that is.
And there's a total of 6 this evening that is for the board's consideration?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, what I'd like you to do is turn to your exhibits. You have a board-mounted exhibit, propagation plots, and just so the board is aware, these have been marked collectively as applicant's exhibit A4. Is that correct?
I wasn't aware of the exhibit number, yes.
Okay. And there are...
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but while you're over there, do you mind just flipping the microphone around?
Okay.
Thank you.
And Mr. Dugan, in the exhibit packets, there are smaller versions of these propagation plans. Are they the same plans that are now before the board in a larger format?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you could go through each of these and describe what these plans show and what the goal is here for AT&T.
Sure. The first map, as part of that package, I know we're planning on going through these one by one, but just as a brief overview, the first map identifies the locations of all 6 small cell proposed locations on one map. 4 of them are pretty central to the city of Scranton. The Morrell Street is to the northeast, and one of them, the Casella by the university, is more in the southeast side of town. Okay. I do have propagation exhibits, but I first prepared maps to show the approximate location of all 6 of the small cell locations. Should I jump ahead to the Morrell Street?
Well, why don't we, because this is going to be redundant testimony for all of these, why don't we just briefly go through and identify the locations, and then we can drill down on the specifics as we get to each site.
Sure, briefly. The first node as part of the package was at 124 North Main Avenue, near the Keystone Restaurant. This particular node, in short, in a nutshell, the objectives are is to provide improved coverage to North Main Street, Wims Place, Price Street, North Edwards Street, Jackson Street, and North Hyde Park Avenue. This small cell, as well as all 6 of the small cells, will improve data throughput speeds and in-building coverage to the community it's intended to serve. Small cells are not like large towers, macro towers, like we know it. These only serve a small area, approximately 1 to 2 blocks in all directions from the small cell location. So that will improve data throughput speeds and provide better in-building coverage to the small area that it's intended to serve. This particular facility will also offload traffic from the existing macro site by the name of, it's a site named Taylor. It's at the Stauffer Industrial Park to the southwest. And 4 of these sites will actually provide all traffic offloading to the macro site at the Stauffer Industrial Park. So all 6 of these small cell facilities, in short, will provide improved coverage, better data throughput speeds, and better in-building coverage for the homes, businesses, and other uses that are in proximity to those small cells. I did visit all 6 of these sites, and I placed checked signal levels with the AT&T smartphone and checked data throughput speeds. All 6 of these areas are experiencing significantly slow data throughput speeds. When you don't have strong enough signal, the throughput data speeds slow down significantly. The second small cell is at 154 South Sumner Avenue, the approximate location. That would improve coverage on Sumner Avenue and the adjoining streets. It also, again, improve data and in-building coverage and provide offloading traffic to the Taylor site at the Stauffer Industrial Park. The third proposed small cell location is at 416 North Main Street. That will improve coverage on North Main Street, Clark Place, West Lackawanna Avenue, Linden Street, and other adjoining streets in the surrounding that small cell location. Again, it will improve data throughput speeds and in-building coverage and provide traffic offloading to the site at the Stauffer Industrial Park. The fourth location is at 1504 Lafayette Street. That site will improve coverage on Lafayette Street, Crossing Court, and other adjoining streets in close proximity, improving data throughput speeds and in-building coverage, and again, provide the same traffic offloading at the Stauffer Industrial Park site, macro tower that AT&T has in service. The fifth site is at 410 Costello Court. That's by, I believe it's the north side. This is Scranton University along Mulberry Street. This site will provide improved coverage on Mulberry Street, Costello Court, and other adjoining streets in close proximity to the University of Scranton. that again will improve data and throughput speeds and in-building coverage. Not only will improve data at one point, not only will improve data input speed, but response time. It's also called latency or ping, or it's a response time for it to respond to a request. And the sixth one is at the 71 Morrell Street and Boulevard Avenue. That site will improve coverage on Boulevard Avenue, Oliphant Avenue, and Morrell Street. Again, improve data throughput and in-building coverage to the immediate area. I visited the site, and it's across the street from a convenience store, and that will offload traffic from different macro sites. There's a site on the north side of it. I believe it's identified as an Armed Forces Reserve Center, and there's a tower there that it would offload traffic from.
Now, Mr. Dugan, do you have a plan that shows the existing level of coverage in this area of interest?
Yes.
If you can turn to that.
There's a next series of maps. First of all, this particular map just shows the location of the existing macro site that I mentioned, identified as the name Taylor at the Stafford Industrial Park, to the west side of the page. The other green sites are existing small cells that are in service, providing service to customers today. So those are existing small cells, and this is to the west is the macro tower. The next exhibit shows coverage footprint from the existing macro tower. You can see it's quite a large area compared to the area that the small cells are serving. Obviously, the taller the tenant support structure, the more line of sight visibility you have to serve the area. So the taller the structure, the larger the area the facility can serve.
And so we're clear, this exhibit is one that is entitled AT&T Existing Coverage Plot at the top, and it shows various colors, red and yellow. I take it that the red and yellow show existing levels of coverage?
Yes, the red is a very reliable coverage to provide strong throughput speeds. Yellow is a less reliable signal level where signal is starting to deteriorate. And most of these small cells in this particular exhibit, the small cell locations are identified on that map, but they're not propagating on that map. The next one will depict that.
All right, so why don't you turn to that one?
The next exhibit shows the four small cells subject to this application that are providing new service to the small area that these facilities are intended to serve.
And they would be for the small cell sites that you previously identified as UNSC1 nodes 1, 2, 3, and 4, is that correct?
That's correct. These are in central to the city of Scranton.
Now, I note that, and you had indicated this before, that you're not getting a lot of coverage footprint from these small cells. Is that correct?
That's correct. And they're not intended to. These are small cells is a less intrusive means of serving the area. Obviously, there's lots of residential communities in this area. We believe small cells are less intrusive than trying to propose a 150-foot macro tower in and around this area. So these are considered a less intrusive means of providing service to the communities that AT&T is trying to serve.
What sort of radius of footprint are you talking about getting from these small cell locations?
It varies widely depending on, it ranges from like 400 to about 600 feet. It all depends on what are the obstructions in the immediate area that can essentially block signal level of buildings and vegetation, reduce signal level propagation. So approximately 400 to 600 feet. Also the frequency band that's provided, there's actually three frequency bands that AT&T is intending to deploy at these small cell facilities. The lower band will provide farther reach, simply the lower the frequency that the signals travel a little further. and the higher frequencies, they don't travel as far. So the higher frequencies are best for capacity for users that are close to the site, and the lower bands better for additional reach for users that are on the fringes of the site.
Now, are you familiar with the concept or the term of 5G or fifth generation wireless technology?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how these small cells fit within that ultimate design goal?
Sure. The current technology AT&T and the other carriers are deploying is fourth generation LTE. They're continuing to deploy small cells for the 4G technology, and that's what we're doing here. But the carriers are also laying the foundation for the fifth generation wireless network of the future. Now, it's important to point out that 5G will not replace 4G. It will work in tandem with 4G. The need for 4G facilities will not go away with the advent of 5G. When I say laying the framework for 5G, the carriers are, they're laying fiber in the major cities to provide the foundation for the future deployment of both 4G and 5G small cells. And they're also deploying small cells for 5G. There's been many cities throughout the country. The primary focus for 5G is in the dense urban areas initially. That'll eventually get built out in a few years. But there are plans to put a 5G antenna on these particular small cell locations, so it will have a 4G antenna solution at the top, and just a couple feet below it, it'll have a 5G antenna in the near future, but not initially.
And can you talk about that in terms of benefit to, in this instance, AT&T customers, and what sort of enhanced communication services they'll have with this technology?
For the 5G?
Yes.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just say for the 4G, it'll improve service substantially from what those users in the area are experiencing now. And once 5G handsets are starting to become available, just in recent months, before that it was just fixed 5G devices for homes. But 5G handsets are starting to become available, and when 5G is deployed at the site and customers have 5G devices, they're going to experience speeds like they've never experienced before, and it'll allow a whole host of applications that we've never seen before, which will transform, everyday life. Okay.
And in terms of public safety, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of E911 service, and also AT&T's development of what they call the FirstNet network for emergency responders. Can you talk a little bit more about those issues and how this additional development of these small cell sites will help facilitate emergency services?
Sure. First for Enhanced 911, it's been around for quite some time. Enhanced 911 is the ability for a cell phone 911 caller, and the call taker at the dispatch center it would pull up on a map on the screen. It would pinpoint that caller's location without the caller being able to describe, oh, I'm at the corner of this street and that street. He'll know immediately without the caller having to describe where he is located. That's Enhanced 911, the ability to pinpoint a handheld cell phone 911 call to approximately 100 feet, which is very significant. And that improves public safety. And the majority of cell phones, it's widely known that probably 80% or more of 911 calls this day and age are from handheld wireless cell phones. Okay, FirstNet.
And FirstNet, and again, how that ties into what we're trying to do here in terms of the additional small cell development for the network in this area.
Sure. Okay, FirstNet, in the aftermath of 9/11, the federal government established FirstNet to put out an RFP to build a nationwide dedicated public safety network to provide, to provide access for first responders, so that when there is a catastrophic event, in 9/11, when all the first responders tried to get on the network, they couldn't because they're competing with the community for access. Well, with FirstNet, they have a dedicated network where they have first priority. They have dedicated devices specifically for the FirstNet network. They have a nationwide dedicated network. The facilities that AT&T is deploying today are going to be able to provide that service to our first responders that are subscribed to the FirstNet network.
And that includes these nodes that are part of the application here tonight, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, again, based upon your propagation plans, it does look like there is basic coverage, but did you also identify a concern with regard to a growing issue, what is known as capacity or lack of capacity as a result of overuse of the network by customers?
Yes.
And in doing that analysis, is there additional benefit from the development of these small cells to provide enhanced capacity to avoid that issue? Well, let's first talk about the issue of capacity or lack of capacity that is becoming an issue for the wireless industry.
Sure. All sites, if we consider the macro site at Stauffer Industrial Park, they have a finite amount of users that can draw from that service. They have a number of frequency bands that they're deploying, a number of radios, and they have only so much capacity that site can serve. When you introduce other sites in the periphery, that picks up the traffic from those areas and offloads traffic from the site that would have served it if those sites were not there. So the small cells will offload capacity from the existing macro sites. In particular, these four will offload capacity from the Stauffer Industrial Park site. The other two sites will offload capacity from other macro sites that are in proximity.
And so we would draw that concept out a little bit further. If we didn't have these small cell sites, ultimately you'd be talking about having to build another tall tower site or what would be considered a macro site to get additional coverage. Is that correct?
That would be the less preferred alternative, yes, to build a tall structure to provide service to an area.
All right. And in the event that these sites would not be approved, would this in any way materially inhibit AT&T's ability of providing the type of service and level of service that it would want to provide to its customers?
That would inhibit their ability to provide service to the customers at the speeds that are, the current technology is capable of.
Okay.
And that does influence public safety.
And in a significant way, ultimately?
Yes.
Okay. And maybe we can then quickly get to, we were talking about the 4 node sites that were identified as UNSC sites. We have the 2 additional sites, the SCRN1 node 8F and node 1D, the ones at Costello Court and Morale Street. Can you identify those locations and then also show the coverage plots, both existing and what is proposed for those 2 node locations?
Sure. The next one I have in the sequence is the one at Morale Street, Boulevard Avenue, and Elephant Avenue. This exhibit just shows 2 macro sites that are currently in service. I mentioned one on the north side of the Armed Forces Reserve Center, and the green circular symbol represents the location of the proposed small cell at this location. As I understand it, it's intended to replace a stop sign. Actually, the stop sign would be remounted on the proposed pole. So that just identifies the locations of those facilities. The next exhibit just shows the propagation from the existing macro facilities.
And just so we're clear, that's AT&T, the plan you're referring to is AT&T existing coverage plot SCRN21, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And this particular exhibit shows propagation from the proposed small cell subject to this application. Again, it does look small. We're talking of antenna height of only approximately 42, roughly 42 feet, compared to other sites that have much taller antenna heights.
And again, the same objective of trying to offload capacity from those surrounding macro sites both to the west and to the north?
Yes.
And trying to provide some additional enhanced coverage in the targeted area that has been identified by you and the AT&T radio frequency engineers, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then your next exhibit and the last site, which would be node 8F at Costello Court?
Yes. Costello's Court at the junction of, what is it, Mulberry Street. That's right by Scranton University. This exhibit just identifies the location of that proposed small cell. Obviously, this location is approximate. Again, I think Mr. Schubert had indicated it had moved approximately 12 feet. Did you?
No, that was number 4, node 4.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Beyond that.
Okay. All right. Okay. This exhibit shows the same map, but it shows propagation from 2 existing sites that are currently in service. One is identified as University of Scranton. I believe it's the one to the south, and the one just to the north of that is another macro site called Downtown Scranton. And this shows coverage afforded by those 2 macro sites. The next exhibit shows the additional served area afforded by this particular node at Costello Court and Mulberry Street. And again, the objectives are to provide improved coverage on Mulberry Street, Costello Court, and other adjoining streets in close proximity by the University of Scranton.
Okay. And then the last series of maps that you have show essentially a graph, and rather than getting into a lot of the technical detail in this, Mr. Dugan, is it fair to say that these graphs show essentially that the surrounding macro sites and the sectors that are looking to these areas that you're trying to cover with the small cells are ultimately trending towards some exhaustion in wireless coverage and the ability of providing satisfactory capacity to the AT&T customers?
Yes, that is exactly correct. Just to summarize, these particular charts depict what's called the sectors of those sites that they're trying to offload. And the system performance engineers of AT&T have tools in-house that they can see the traffic data, how much data each site is carrying, and they can see the trends. They can see the trends over time and project trends into the future. Because the amount of data usage has just exploded for all the carriers, the number of applications that every subscriber is utilizing, and the number of subscribers has increased exponentially over time. So all the carriers are striving to keep up with the demand for service.
You see a time though that every block is going to have one of these on there?
Pardon me?
You see a time when every city block is going to have one of these antennas on too?
I don't. There's many variables that come into where these facilities are placed, and I think the notion that it's going to be on every block, I think is not realistic, and I don't see the need for that going that direction. I don't see the need for the 4 nodes that are close together to get any more dense than that. Nobody can predict what's far into the future, but I just don't see this it's certainly not going to be at every block.
And Mr. Dugan, one of the other items that you were called upon to consider was whether or not there were any health or safety concerns regarding the radio wave emissions from these 6 proposed small cell node locations. And I would state to you that marked as applicants Exhibit A6 are RF safety compliance reports that you prepared dated December 3rd to Mr. A.J. Tegler, and they're signed off on by you. And I take it that you've done an analysis for each one of these small cell node locations?
Yes, I have.
And can you briefly describe to the board the methodology and the criteria that you have to apply in doing the analysis as to whether or not each of these node locations meets the FCC requirements regarding radio wave emissions?
Sure. I have performed an evaluation to provide a determination certification that every small cell location, in these 6 small cells, and there's a separate report for all 6, will comply with the Federal Communication Commission exposure limits and guidelines for the health, safety, and welfare of the public. The FCC sets the national standard for compliance with electromagnetic field safety. AT&T provides me their operating parameters, and I perform calculations based on FCC prescribed methodology to determine what's the upper limit electromagnetic fields anywhere near these proposed facilities. I not only consider ground level, but I'll consider any adjacent buildings that these antennas might be close to. All of them are virtually identical, with the exception the first one was close to a building, but we had proposed to increase the height so it would be up approximately the parapet level or slightly above the parapet in order to not place it projecting directly into someone's window within 6 or 7 feet. The report summarizes the operating parameters and the methodology to determine compliance, and the upper limit ground level exposure anywhere near the base of these proposed small cells is on the order of less than 1% of the federal safety standard, less than 1%. For anyone that's at the antenna level, you would want to be less than 3 feet, and who's going to be less than 3 feet of a canister antenna on top of a pole? At a distance of approximately 10 feet at the same level as the canister antenna, you're at less than 20% of the FCC's general population exposure limit. As a registered professional engineer, my first priority is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. I take safety very seriously. I've spent my entire career performing measurements directly in front of these antennas, so I know what they're transmitting, and I know what to expect from these types of facilities.
So utility work, they might be working on that pole or the wire that's connected to that pole, and he's up close to that canister. Is he safe? He or she's safe? Are there precautions that they have to take to do inform them?
Yes, there would be precautions. If someone needed to perform work within 3 feet of the antenna, they probably they typically put identification signs near the antenna to state if work needs to be performed, who to contact, and so that they can work with the carrier to determine whether they need to reduce power or temporarily shut down to allow maintenance to take place.
And also then stated another way too, with regard to your conclusions that it only amounts to 1% of the limit, you could, if you could possibly fit 100 of these antennas at one location, you would just meet that limit then at that location, correct?
You'd still comply.
You'd still
comply, even if you had 100 of these theoretically at the same location.
All right, and Mr. Dugan, you also considered.
Sir, wait a minute. Would you go back to the podium if you finish with your diagram?
If you can turn around, Paul, we're done with the.
Oh, okay.
So the court reporter can pick up your testimony. Now, Mr. Dugan, you also consider whether or not any of these proposed small cell node locations would cause any radio interference with any other radio-based technology. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I will tell you that the reports that you prepare for each of these node locations is set forth as a collective exhibit as applicants A7. This is a report that was prepared by you, dated December 3rd, also to Mr. A.J. Tegler. Do you recall doing that report?
I do.
And what were the conclusions relative to that report?
Sure. That report is a discussion, and it is a certification that the proposed AT&T small cell will not cause any disruptive interference with any radio frequency uses in proximity to the installation. Whether they be, police, fire, EMS, radio, any uses in the environment, residential, household appliances. AT&T is solely uses their own frequency bands that will not interfere with other uses, and the only potential for uses if they were co-located with insufficient separation from other carriers. There are no other carriers proposed in this particular these particular facilities. So there will be no interference by virtue of the fact that they have their own frequencies and they're physically separated from every other use in the environment.
Okay, thank you. And just so the record's clear, I misidentified the exhibits. Actually, the non-interference report is A6, and the electromagnetic emissions compliance report is A5, just so we're clear on the record on that. And Mr. Dugan, with regard to any sort of noise, odor, lighting, or anything like that, there's no need for any additional lighting, or there's no concern for noise or odor that would be generated from these facilities in operation?
Absolutely not.
Okay. And as I stated, all the equipment is going to be mounted onto the pole?
Yes.
So nothing would be mounted on the ground at ground level?
No ground equipment.
And obviously no need to light these facilities, is that correct?
No.
Okay. I have no further questions of Mr. Dugan. If any of the board members have any questions?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right.
Mr. Schubert, could you have Mr. Dugan explain to the board and to the public what the municipality is allowed to consider with regard to health effects to these antennas?
Can you answer that, Mr. Dugan?
Sure. The Telecommunications Act states that no municipality may consider potential for health effects on the basis of provided the facilities comply with the FCC exposure limits and guidelines.
And that was your conclusion on each of these sites, that it
Yes.
didn't comply?
It's also in there in my compliance report, stated that in the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would then, thank you, Mr. Dugan. I think I'm finished with your testimony. Mr. Ozer? Whatever's more comfortable for you.
If you're going to use that mic, I'll move there.
I'll use that one.
Go ahead, I'll sit right here. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Ozer, you are a site acquisition consultant, and
He was.
Yes.
Yeah, all three are sworn in.
you're a site acquisition consultant. I know that you've testified before this board. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you've probably described to the board your qualifications and what you do as a job?
Yes, I did. But if they'd like to hear that again, just ask. I will.
I think we're familiar with Mr. Rosen.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, and so, Mr. Ozer, let's jump back now into some of the specifics with regard to each of the node locations. First off, each of these node locations is in the right-of-way, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And AT&T does have a franchise right-of-way agreement with the city of Scranton, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And what does that agreement, to your knowledge, allow AT&T to do?
Basically, after the issuance of a zoning permit, electrical permit, and building permit, AT&T, as long as there's a signed site license agreement for all the nodes, AT&T can build the site within the right-of-way.
Okay. And each of these node locations is proposing a new utility pole installation?
That is correct, sir.
And who would own that utility pole once it's put in?
According to the master lease agreement, the city of Scranton.
All right. And that lease agreement, at least a redacted version of that is attached as applicant's exhibit A7.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, we were going to start off at Mr. King's suggestion with the site location at Morrill Street, 71 Morrill Street. That is
Okay,
in the R3 district, is that correct?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, based upon your knowledge of the city code and also the zoning district map, that's in the R3 district, which requires a use variance, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Now, Mr. Ozer, can you kind of describe what you did in terms of a search process for that no location and what is proposed generally? And noting that this is the D candidate, which is...
That is correct.
Which means that this is your fourth run at trying to find a coverage solution for that?
Yes, sir, you're correct.
All right. Please describe your efforts on this.
Okay, in reference to this particular site, I was given a pin. A pin basically is a Latin long on a map, and the radio frequency department advises that I find something suitable for their qualifications of a small cell site. The first site I chose was candidate A, which was brought to this board, approved, which is in the center of the Morrell housing complex. After extensive negotiations, we were unable to acquire a lease with the housing authority, as I mistakenly believed that the housing authority was also part of the city of Scranton. So we could not get a lease. At that point, two other candidates were brought before radio frequency. One of them was just in July of last year, this year, I believe it was candidate C, and speaking with this board, it was denied. Again, close to the other site. From there, I went back, redrove the area, re-scrubbed the area, and with careful consideration by our radio frequency department, we selected a stop sign at the intersection of Boulevard Avenue, Oliphant Street, and Morrell Street. It's a typical stop sign, about 8 feet tall. And at that point, it is found out that I researched and found it is in the right-of-way with the city of Scranton. There are electric lines on either side of it, utility poles on either side, but they are inconsequential, meaning they will not interfere with the small cell site when it is constructed, or if it is constructed. And also the small cell site will not interfere with the radio, with the telephone lines and electric lines that are presently on site. We went through, did our fiber walks, electric and power walks, and from there it was I advised that this is probably a very good location for as another candidate for this particular pin. Now, the pin was in the center of the Morrell Housing Project. So this one here is approximately 250 feet from the pin, and the other two nodes about 100 feet on either from the nodes.
So would it be fair to say that this one is pushing the limit for where the radio frequency engineer would want that bullseye?
Yes, it is, sir. This one here is pushing the limit.
And you're talking about replacing a stop sign. You're not talking about putting in the antenna at 8 feet. This is going to be a utility pole.
Yeah, that is correct. It will be a utility pole. The utility pole to the site designation of about 40 feet on the plans, and the stop sign will be replaced on the pole.
And you've done that application before in other jurisdictions?
Yes, sir, I have.
All right. And we have site plans that have been prepared that support this application, and these site plans are marked as Exhibit A13.
If I could ask a question before we go to the next step. Back to that, the pole that you're going to install will replace the stop sign. Now, did I hear you say that the city will own that pole?
Yes,
after
sir.
Who's responsible for the equipment should a car hit that pole?
Oh, AT&T, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Now, and that's because we don't want, basically in reference to that, we don't want your personnel trying to put back together the AT&T equipment because it is substantial, and I say substantial in dollars and cents, but also for what it's intended to do. So it's definitely AT&T.
Okay.
Now, should the Mr. King, a planner, and/or the zoning department and/or the Department of Public Works want a light on that site, it will be put on. Now, in that area, it is, I saw it at night, it could use some illumination, but that's what the building permit, the electrical permit and the building permit is for. And all they have to do is make the request, and I speak with Dennis Gallagher on a regular basis in reference to these nodes. We'll just change the plans and put a light on it.
And you're talking about a street light?
I'm sorry, a street light, yes. Not a blinking light, or an FAA light, or whatever, a qualified LED street light, one of the new varieties.
Okay. And you've commissioned having a photo simulation done of what this facility would look like if, in fact, it was constructed and placed at that location, correct?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
And if I direct your attention to A19, I think this is the last of the series of the photo simulations that would be at the back part of that exhibit.
Yes, sir, it is.
And what I'm looking at is, obviously, not today, but probably sometime earlier this year. There's some snow on the ground, and I see the before and after.
In fact, sir, I can tell, I took that picture just about 2 weeks ago, in the first snow.
That's right.
It is very recent.
Winter arrives earlier here.
Yeah, it is very recent.
All right. And that shows the proposed installation of the utility pole and the antenna at the top.
Yes, sir.
And that antenna can be painted brown to match the pole, is that correct?
That is correct.
And that's what's depicted here.
That is correct, yes, sir.
And where is the equipment as depicted on that pole?
If you follow down the pole, basically at the second level of the house in the background, you can see the panels. I'll show it from my figure right here. You'll see that it's very kind of stealthed in there. It's the right about the second level windows, and it's the radio box is basically hanging off the side.
Okay. And then I note in that photograph that there are wires coming from, I guess, across the street.
Yes, sir.
So I would take it that there's other utility poles across the street?
Yes, sir, there are.
And why couldn't they be used?
They are owned by PP&L and Verizon, but they have primary power on them. And one of the conditions of using any utility poles with PP&L is I cannot use them because they have primary power. It is a safety issue for the installation of the antenna system, and also for those who work on the power lines, and for the technicians for AT&T working within the general power, because those primary power are, I guess you would consider unshielded. So I mean, there's raw electric going through them, and PP&L doesn't want any liability of those. So I could not use any of those poles.
Okay. Well, I would have no further questions of Mr. Ozer on this particular site. I also have my civil engineer who could talk about the structural and code compliance. That's also kind of more general sort of testimony that would apply to all the sites. And if any of the board members have any particular questions regarding the details of any of these sites, I would also have the engineer who'd be able to talk about that as well. So at the board's pleasure,
I think we pretty much got the gist of what's going on. I'm sure the audience might want to have some input on, or they might have some questions.
And I could have Mr. Ozer then go through each of these other sites, or if there's any particular questions regarding any of the sites, we can then address those.
Yeah, that's what I think would be best.
Okay. Very quickly, for our engineer, in terms of the structural capacity of these facilities, these utility poles to support the antenna, the equipment, any concern in that regard?
So the way this is backed up is by the structural reports that are included for each antenna, each pole. And the concept is that on those poles you have these appurtenances, which is the equipment and the antenna body itself. And the design codes that are being applied are the local, the codes that hold jurisdiction in this area, and also the NESC code, which is the National Electrical Safety Code, which requires the pole to be designed for a certain wind load and ice load. And wind load and the ice load is determined by the maps that are used by nationally by, for example, IBC, which is the International Building Code, and ASCE, which is the American Society of Civil Engineers -7 is another code that controls these kind of structures. So based on that, the data we have generated satisfies the structural compliance, essentially.
Okay. And these are stringent code requirements?
Yes.
And they would also be tested and reviewed by the city during the building permit process when these poles would be installed? Would
Yeah,
that
I
be
mean,
fair?
all the reports are signed and sealed by a professional engineer, and so, you know, they're standing behind what they're saying.
And are these installations fairly standard in terms of the design and layout, meaning that you have the single, what they would call a cantenna, a circular antenna placed on top of the pole? Is that correct?
Yes.
Approximately 2 feet high,
Yes.
about 1 foot in diameter?
Yeah.
And then the radio equipment would be placed about 10 feet off the ground in an enclosed shroud?
That is correct.
Okay. And then how is electric taken to these sites typically?
I mean, that would be something that I guess I would allude to.
All right. Well, and that would be
some of the
something
people
during...
here, yeah.
I'd be able to answer that.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
In reference to that, the electric is in a demarc at the base of the pole and/or aerial, depending on its location. And then from there, if it's aerial, it goes right to the antenna system, and then from there down the pole in a riser, which is like a conduit into the radio equipment box. From the ground, now again, each site is specific. If the electric comes from underground aerial, there is a box, a demarc box in the ground. Then from there it goes up the side of the pole to the radio equipment. It is based on each individual location and the design for the location. It's not one size fits all.
Okay. So at this point, that essentially describes each of the small cells without getting into the specific detail and the site plans for each. I'm prepared to allow any of the residents, if they have any particular questions, and perhaps we can address those on any specific sites that they might have questions on.
Does anybody want to give testimony on this case? Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address?
My name is Karen Slack Matter. I live at 110 Schlittler Road, Springbrook Township, PA. Matter, Slack, SLACK-MATTERN.
Do you own property anywhere near any of these antennas?
The reason I'm here today, I was asked to come on the request of my father, Dennis Slack, who lives at 2503 Boulevard Avenue, which is directly across the street from the proposed pole, and my in-laws, Robert and Alice Mattern, who live at 2404 Oliphant Avenue, who will have, the proposed pole is approximately less than 30 feet from their front door. The reason they asked me to come is they are opposed to the pole, and they're asking the council to deny the AT&T to put the pole up. And there was 3 specific reasons for that. First reason is aesthetic, of course. Right now, what sits there now is a metal pole with a stop sign on it. Like I said, my father's view from his porch forward right now is just the stop sign in the houses. From my in-laws, it's just the stop sign. You put the pole up with, you put that big pole up with whatever the antennas on top. Again, it's going to impact the aesthetic of the properties. That was their main concern, that they didn't want another pole there. And like they did say, there are poles in the area that I understand they can't use because they have live wires on them. But they didn't want another pole put there. It's with the convenient, it's just clustered already. It's a residential section. You're going to just take away from that residential feel. The other is the impact to their health. I know you said that FCC regulates the amount of the radioactive, the electromagnetic, I guess, radioactive coming off the poles, and it's great that they regulate it. Except I can't find, when I looked, any long-term studies that show the effect that it has on the health of people or residents who live within a close proximity, like I said, within 20 to 30 feet of these poles. My in-laws do. They're going to, every time they sit on their porch, they're going to be 20 feet away from this pole. Even though it's elevated or the antennas are elevated, they're still within 20 feet. Again, can't find any long-term studies showing health effects on that. That's their concern. Another is the environmental impact that the pole would have. I'm not sure if you're aware, but that intersection, Boulevard Avenue, is notorious for taking on lots of water during rainstorms, and we've had some doozies lately. So much so that when the water comes down from both Fisk Street and Morale Street into that intersection, we've seen it flood, we've seen manhole covers blow off of the manholes because of the strength of that water. After these storms, the ground is saturated for a week or so afterwards. Our concern with the pole is, if you're putting it in, and I'm sure from what I look at this, the report, it's going to go at least 7 feet in the ground, which is great. What is to guarantee that there's not going to be some, when you start digging, an issue with drainage at that point, or when you put the pole in, that it's not going to somehow affect, with the wet ground, or that it's not going to tip, or some safety issue with it.
That's your question.
Basically, they were the concerns that they had. Again, they were just requesting that there's got to be another area for it. A question I had myself when I was looking at the paperwork that you handed us was, there is, the flood protection project was done down on Parker Street, which is not even a quarter mile away from us. There are no residences, there's no houses down there, it's just a factory setting. It wouldn't disturb anyone, like, was that area at all looked at to see if potentially, instead of putting it in a residential area, putting it somewhere where it's not so residential?
I think Mr. Ozer can
Yes, I can
answer that question, and I think we need to break some of this down. Mr. Ozer, you're familiar, I think you addressed this neighbor's concern, or the concern on behalf of her parents. First, with regard to the issue of the proximity, you're familiar with that location.
Yes, I am.
You've heard this witness testify regarding how close that porch would be relative to the antenna, being at, I think her testimony was 30 feet to 20 feet.
Now, the
Do you
pole...
have an opinion about that?
Yes, the pole would be roughly 40 feet from the porch to the pole, right? The antenna, being the height that it is, would be well over 100 feet on a linear move, meaning from the porch to that antenna system is not a direct line, it is on a tangent.
Yeah.
So it'd be
Now,
roughly about 100 feet.
to answer her other issue that she had with regard to the investigation of this industrial site, which is about a quarter mile away, would that be a site that would be too far away relative to trying to establish the small cell location for the RF engineer?
In reference to that, there's two answers to your question. One, the site is too far away from the pin that's required, and number two, it would have no function within the network as there's nothing around it. The small cell site is designed to offload capacity within an area, as which Mr. Dugan has stated, to offset the capacity issue of the location. So in that area, I looked at it, there's nothing there. And basically, again, it's designed to offload and to help out the system in high traffic areas, meaning RF traffic areas.
And you also testified regarding the aesthetics that right across the street are PP&L primary power lines. I take it that because they're primary power lines, that they're rather substantial.
They are substantial, and several of them have transformers on them. And also, too, the power lines across the street have a null and bob on the top, which actually holds the power line holds one of the power lines onto each pole. So it's not just one line, it's several lines.
And to address the other issue that was raised in terms of the concern regarding the placement of the pole in soils. Mr. Shahid, as the civil engineer, with regard to the standards that you've testified to, would that all be taken into account? And perhaps you can elaborate on what sort of, how these utility poles are placed in the ground, and whether that's a typical type of installation and something that would be usual.
So, there are two ways of doing it. One is that you drive them, and you actually are pounding it into the ground till it gets to that 7 feet, or you auger them, and if you auger them, then you put this dry pack material around it to secure it. Now, the reason why they go to 7 feet, they've done testing on these poles, and the frost depth in this area is about 3 feet. That is where normally all the bottom of foundations are when you build your house. So essentially you're going 3.5 feet below, or close to 4 feet below that. So that issue of something eroding, there could be some erosion with flooding, but not to a point that it would dislodge the pole. And these poles are all over the place, and they are holding.
Okay. And the question regarding health, the safety, again, unless you have something to show me, long-term study of being so close to residential sections.
I'll just remind the board, and you've probably heard this before, that the FCC has preempted the issue of health effects.
We can't consider that.
That it has been established that we are in compliance with regard to that standard. So essentially, this board should be considering the health effects. But I will let you know that if anybody has a cell phone, and Mr. Dugan, you can back me up on this and tell me if I'm wrong, but anybody who has a cell phone in their pocket has more RF energy as a result of the cell phone if they're talking than you would ever get from one of these small cells or even the macro cells, the larger cells. Is that correct?
Correct. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wants to give testimony on this? You raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address?
August D. Petro, 134 North Gravel Pond Road, Clark Summit, PA. I own the building across the street at 409 North Main, and I also have the house at 1504 Lafayette. Thanks to Mr. King and talking with the gentleman from AT&T, we discussed about the pole on Lafayette Street. The house is up for sale right now, and the people we're talking with have a potential garage that they'd like to put on the property. The pole was scheduled to go 27 feet, right in the center of that lot. So, I mean, it would really make the lot useless, just for, for the children to play in. So we talked with the gentleman, and we came up with an idea, he came up with an idea of moving the pole 12 feet towards the court. Now, my only question to him is it from the center of the court, or is it from the curb on the court? Because there's two issues with the garbage truck trying to get in to the court. It cannot get in or get out if it's too close to the edge of the court.
I can answer that.
Yeah, please, Mr. Rose.
Okay, basically, Mr. DePietro, it is, the site is actually 12 feet from the original location, which puts it roughly 2.5 feet or almost 3 feet from the curb.
Okay.
So if a truck would go, in reference to the site itself, either coming out of Crossing Court
Right.
or going into it, it would have to run over the curb to hit the pole.
Okay, it does do that. Because
well-
it hit our fence several times. That's my only question with that particular movement of the thing, because I was just talking with the gentleman on Monday, the garbage people, and I told him that there's going to be possibly a pole put on this corner. And they said, geez, it's gonna make it tough for us to either get in or get out with that truck. So that's what I'm saying to you is it from the center of the court where you took the 12 feet, or is it gonna be from that curb?
Oh, no, it's actually from the curb, it's 3 feet from the curb,
Okay?
right? And for the 12 feet is from the original location.
That was 27 feet?
No, it was 27 feet.
The original location was 20 feet.
Right, so
27 feet.
we moved it over 12 feet.
Okay.
12 feet on the curb, so it's actually on the corner there. Now, I measured it when I was there.
Right.
I measured it was from the original location, I measured it at 12 feet to its present location that we redesigned.
Right.
Which is dig in takes it 3 feet, about roughly 3 feet from the curb.
Mostly I was concerned about the use of the lot, because the house is going to be sold and the people wouldn't be able to put up a garage.
I tell you,
It would be useless.
I think the depiction here would probably show you much better than trying to explain.
Of course, I'm gonna take all the pictures, put them somewhere.
Thank you. Yeah, that would leave the whole thing open. Yeah. Yeah, the garbage you could swing in.
Yeah, it looks like they would take the fence, they're gonna hit this.
Yeah, well, there's a fence that goes down the court. That's what they really, when they make the swing in with the truck, it's very difficult. They hit the fence 90% of the time, but,
Deal with locations, right?
okay. One other question I have for you, at 416 North Main, that's directly across from my building. Neighborhood Works is going to be redoing Main Avenue. Are these going to stay wooden poles, or are they going to change with the environment of the area?
Sir, I tell you what, this is the first I've heard about that.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't know what the design is gonna look like for whoever wants to redo that on here, but,
It's a wooden pole right now.
it's a wooden pole, that's
And
planned.
they're talking about remodeling from Orm Street to St. Anne Street. And they're gonna go metal poles, designer poles on the main avenue. But what I'm trying to say is, are these poles going to also change to adapt to the area?
Well, this particular pole, see, again, this is the first I've heard about this.
Right.
What I can make, as long as it's a direction of the zoning hearing board, we can put the pole up, get it functioning and all that. Then when this design comes in, whether it be 1 year, 10 years,
Right.
1, 5, or 10, with the direction of the zoning hearing board, it can be replaced.
To match the area?
To match the area.
Okay.
Now, I will say, I will caution you on one thing, and the zoning hearing board as well on this. It will not be exact to what you have there, because your plates, most likely the lights and all that will be maybe 14 feet, maybe 15 feet.
Right.
This one is 40. We can design to make sure that it will
Something's
match.
functionable and matches what's ever
Yes.
there.
Yes,
Okay.
now, I cannot offer that now to you.
Right.
And I'm certain Mr.
And
Schubert
it's
will
going to
agree.
affect two poles where you have the two sites, one down by Keystone Lunch and right across from my particular building. Those two poles are going to be affected in the change.
Okay. With that in mind, then, Mr. Schubert, I've known this happened before, right? But again, this is the first time I've heard this, so
Right.
that we designed it with the wooden pole.
Right.
We can put it up, and then from there,
Right.
with the 1 year or 5 years, make the determination to switch it out. And that would be the direction that the zoning hearing board, that AT&T would have to approve.
I would just submit to the board that I think that would be a reasonable condition of any approval, that if the board wanted to impose that upon AT&T, they would have to consider that. I would also submit that that's probably an issue that's already covered under the franchise agreement, that the city would reserve the right, if they do upgrades of that nature, or they would require removal for some reason, that the city has always reserved the right to do that. I haven't reviewed the agreement, but the typical franchise agreement would provide something like that.
Just one other question I have. Will AT&T be selling rights to that pole to, like, say, Verizon or another
I
facility?
tell you what, I will let the radio frequency engineer answer that question. I know the answer. It's no, but I'll have Paul explain why no, because he is the radio frequency engineer.
No, these poles are not designed for co-location. Structural capacity is for AT&T. And when two carriers have to occupy a same structure, they have to have a certain amount of physical separation from each other's antennas in order to not have detrimental interference to each other's operation. So I would say no, these are not open to co-location for other carriers.
The reason why I ask is directly across the street from 1504 Lafayette, Xfinity just put a big box on the pole right across the street. That's what I was asking, that if they would sell rights to, like, say, Xfinity or another company. That's the only reason why I asked you that. You know, because all of a sudden, there's no poles on the side of the street where you propose this pole, and then all of a sudden we have one pole with a conglomerate of cabinets.
So the answer to that is no. And Mr. Shahid here will agree. It's designed specifically for the equipment. It's designed for the specific equipment. To add anything else onto it will make it structurally unsound. I wouldn't say structurally unsound, but it's designed for the equipment that's there.
Okay. That's it. I want to thank Mr. King for giving me the knowledge to talk to you about it and try to head off the situation before the meeting. Thank you again.
Is there anyone else that wants to give testimony?
I have a question now, and it may have been answered, so I apologize. But the question about the pole ending up pretty much in front of a vacant lot that maybe no one's paying attention to, or somebody is. If somebody were to purchase that or want to develop that lot in the future, can this pole be moved? At that time, like after the fact, all of a sudden that's a lot someone has interest in? Because based on that testimony, if the pole goes there and there's nothing going on with the lot, in the future it may bring down the value.
Well, sir, I can answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
I've had it happen before, but not with small cell sites, right? Not with small cell sites, as we're very specific where we go. I have a little bit of latitude in reference to where I can place the site. Once it gets integrated into the network, it's very difficult. But if the landowner or property owner or something like that would agree to do the move and pay for it, it could be moved.
But I'm saying it's in the right of way.
Where
they want to put a garage there, and the pole's in the middle of where the car is supposed to drive.
Well, see,
what do we do in that situation?
We don't know about the future.
Right.
In reference to anything there. So this is why we're here at the zoning hearing board and the electrical and building and all that. That's why we're here. Because Mr. DePietro, just what happened with him, he contacted Mr. King. Mr. King contacted me. And then I contacted August and said, what's the issue? What can I do for you?
Okay.
And that's how it was moved.
Mr. Rose, my understanding was it was moved to avoid that situation.
To avoid just that situation.
So that it wouldn't block any potential access to that.
That is correct.
But let me ask you a question now. If Mr. DePietro didn't come forward, would the pole have been placed?
The pole would have been placed, yes, sir.
So would it behoove you to be more diligent and be aware if there's a lot there that there could be?
The answer to that is, sir, yes, and it has made me more diligent on the other sites that I'm working on right now to investigate further for the houses that are there and everything else like that. Yes, the answer is that, because I don't want to see that to happen, because it's kind of my integrity on the line here that I screwed up.
And for my own personal opinion, going forward, whether it's your company or somebody else, I'd vote no on that. If it was in front of
I'm sorry, sir?
I said, going forward, whether it's your company or somebody else, and one of the plans came out in front of a vacant lot, I'd vote no. Because the situation could be where Bob buys that lot, he can't develop it, like you said, for a garage or something like that. So I'm just saying, down the road, I'm sure you're gonna come back, and there's other ones that do come here. I'd be a little more diligent on my end to see where they're sitting.
That has, with what has happened with Mr. August, with Mr. DePietro, I have reviewed everything that I've currently in the works, not only for the city of Scranton, which, not only for the city of Scranton, but in other areas, just to avoid this situation, because, quite honestly, sir, it costs money every time I redo a set of plans, and that comes off a budget, which is kind of way far above mine, but it trickles down.
It trickles down, right. I appreciate that fact. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
part of the reason I mentioned that is the city is trying to get pretty much some of these lots sold, so there's a tax break available for people to develop properties, commercial, residential, whatever, So I think in the future, you're gonna see some of these lots start to move where they hadn't in the past, and I would hate for something like the situation that was just avoided
Right. So,
to present itself.
Mr. Marks, quite honestly, I'm the only one that for the AT&T company right now that is working with the city of Scranton and a lot of the surrounding areas. I will take care of that very carefully, and my associates who are, no, I work for NBNC, so I will alert them to the situation in the city of Scranton here.
I have just one other question you brought up. Now, when you put that pole in, will there be an easement put in our deed
No,
for
sir.
that pole?
No, sir, it's like you.
Just for
it's
the
a
right of
utility.
way?
It's using the right of way for the city of
Okay.
Scranton.
All right.
No, there's not, we will not be touching your deed.
Okay, thank you.
So Dan, we're gonna vote on these one by one?
I believe we should.
Just a quick question. The one on Main Avenue that you're gonna add 8 feet on, so you put a new pole altogether in there?
Well, sir, we actually, the designs have not been done yet, but it will be, the pole that we have originally designed will not be there. It'll be the whole new design for the additional height.
So what I'm saying is, it's gonna be a brand-new 48-foot pole?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay, that's.
Yes, sir, because there is nothing there right now.
Okay,
Yeah, no, it is a brand new pole.
thank you.
And the woman that first spoke about replacing the stop signs, that was on Boulevard Avenue you're replacing the stop sign?
70 Morel.
And what was the other one over there?
And Boulevard Avenue.
Okay.
It's literally, if you've been to the area, when you're on Boulevard Avenue, you keeping the Morel Housing Project to your right. Continue there, you will have a stop sign right there at Morel Street and Boulevard Avenue. You go another part, about 15, 20 feet up, you have another stop sign on the right-hand side. Boulevard Avenue takes the left, Elephant Street comes in, coming down the hill, and there's a small access road behind the housing complex, and Morel Street is there. It's a three-way intersection, or four-way intersection there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to clarify, sir, it's not the first stop sign, it's the second one.
Okay.
I'll make a motion, we vote on the first.
Second that.
The first one is Morel Street, the Park Gardens one.
We got a second?
Yeah. Click Carrie second.
Ms. Newcomb?
Morel Street, you said?
Right.
No on that one.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Gattens?
No.
Mr. Chairman?
No. Voted 3-2, that one's been denied.
Next one is 124 North Main Avenue.
Make a motion?
Second.
Ms. Newcomb?
Yes.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Gattens?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. 5-0, have been approved on that one.
Next is 154 South Sumner Avenue.
I'll make a motion?
Second.
Ms. Newcomb?
No on that one.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Gattens?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Voted 4-1, you've been approved.
Next is 416 North Main Avenue.
I'll make a motion?
Second.
Ms. Newcomb?
Yes.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Gattens?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Voted 5-0, that one's been approved.
1504 Lafayette Street.
I'll make a motion?
Second.
Ms. Newcomb?
No.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Gattens?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Voted 4-1, you've been approved.
And the last one is, it's originally listed as 1013 Mulberry. It's actually 410, 412 Costello
Yeah.
Court.
It's all the same
It's all the same property.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion?
Second.
Ms. Newcomb?
Yes.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Gattens?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Voted 5-0, that's been approved.
Thank you for your time and your patience.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
All right, we got a lot of signing to do.